everyone. Welcome to Just Say It, the podcast by communicators for communicators. On this show, we have in-depth conversations with journalists, messaging experts, designers, marketers, leaders, and managers, and unpack their wisdom and experience. Each episode is designed for strategic communicators looking to level up and advance their careers. I'm your host, Rochelle Bedell. Neal Foard is an award-winning advertising and marketing creative professional with leadership experience in advertising, experiential marketing, and client-side brand development. He's worked at advertising agencies such as Saatchi Saatchi and brand agencies such as MC² Experience and the Czarnowski Collective. He's currently working with Within Inc., a marketing and IT agency focused on helping tech companies with technology, design, and marketing projects. Neal also provides consulting services to help business leaders articulate their agendas more effectively. But likely what you know Neal Foard best for is his heartwarming and inspiring videos on social media. Through storytelling, Neal has developed a large following on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, with stories about everyday people that bring hope, laughter, and inspiration. Neal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
So, Neal, what I wanted to start with first, I know you tell stories for a living, but I really wanted to hear from you as we start this conversation about what stories have inspired you. Do you have a favorite story?
A favorite story from my own experience. And the reason I use this one as an example is that oftentimes the best stories start with some disaster and or problem that ultimately resolves itself happily. And in this case, what happened to me was when I was first starting out in my career, my white collar career, I had an absolutely terrible car and it was kind of haunted. And at just the wrong moments, it would always crap out on me. So one morning on a Monday, I have to get to work and I have this very long commute and the car decides to just absolutely give up the ghost. Now, I really didn't have much money and I certainly didn't have any time. This was back before cell phones and back before the internet. And so I had to go searching through the yellow pages, looking for somebody who could fix my car inexpensively. And what's more, since the car wouldn't move, I had to get somebody to tow me. And everybody was saying, well, we'd be happy to tow you, but it's going to cost you $200 just for the tow before we can get started on the repair. And so I was frantic. And I found this tiny little ad in the yellow pages for a company called something like Balkan Auto Repair Garage Business. And I thought, okay, let's give them a try. And thankfully, not only would they say, yes, we can absolutely fix you and fit you in, but we'll send the tow truck for free. I'll send my father, was what the guy says. This tow truck shows up that's missing a few key parts. And I'm not sure that the guy's dad was, I think he was new to tow trucks. He's trying desperately to hook my car to this tow truck and he's not doing very well. And I'm sort of helping him out. But in the process of helping him get the car hooked up, my suit got mangled and it got greasy. And normally that would have made me furious. But the guy was just so sunny. He was like 90 years old, had this beautiful head of ice cream white hair. And he was so bright and chipper that it just affected me. You know, I've heard again and again new discoveries about quantum mechanics and quantum physics that we often underestimate the power of human vibrations. And I would say that having met this guy, I would have been a believer that there's a real power to positive people. So the two of us are riding along in his tow truck and he is trying to cheer me up in his limited English. And he's bouncing in his seat, dancing, singing some, I don't know, Armenian folk song, trying to teach it to me. We finally show up at the garage and about 4 generations of his family go to work on my car, like an F1 pit crew. And everybody's got his same spirit of sunshine and positivity, except for the woman running the place. And she is dark and dour. And she's looking at me like I'm there to rob the place. And about the only thing I can get out of her is we close at noon. You know, and so I'm feeling very kind of intimidated by her. But you know what? I've been so enchanted by the infectious positivity of the old guy that I'm sort of taking it on as my life mission while I'm waiting for my car to make her smile. And I'm not having any luck. And I'm telling her every joke I know and trying to be a goofball. And it's just having none of this effect. But over the course of the day, finally they come in and the car is repaired and it's beautiful. And they've done such an overkill on fixing it. They've harnessed the wires and steam cleaned the engine bay. And I'm just tickled. And finally I'm thinking, well, this is fantastic. I can't wait to get on my way. I pull out my checkbook to pay and I look behind this woman and there is a 3 foot by 4 foot sign that I haven't noticed up to this point that says no checks. And I look at her and she sees that I see the sign and I see that she sees that I see the sign. And there's this moment of tension while I'm looking into her eyes for some sign of humanity and charity. And there's nothing there. And just at that moment in desperation, in walks the old guy carrying a little infant in his arms. And the baby has the same head of hair as the old guy, except that it's jet black. And I look at the baby and the baby locks eyes with me. And there's this moment where the baby just goes, "Go!" And he stares at me and goes, "Oh," and he squeals in delight. And the old guy says, "He knows you from before in the other life." And at that point, the woman behind the counter goes, "If he knows you, a check's okay." And just after I pay and I'm getting ready to go, the lady with this very clever expression says, "We're closing for lunch. You hungry?" And it's a tiny flicker of a smile. And I just went, I got into her finally. The reason I so love that story is, one, it's absolutely true. You should have seen the expression on this baby's face. He really did recognize me. The second thing that I love about the story is the day started out as such a disaster, but I left that place with such goodwill for mankind. You know, some people do that to you. They just restore you like a massage. And I walked away from that a better person. That's why I like sharing it, is just that some people are like that. They have that effect. So I try to carry that with me wherever I go, you know, that same infectious sense that, you know what, we're all going to make it and people are better than you think they are.
I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about the stories that you're sharing on social media right now, is that it is this focus on restoring humanity, right? Really looking at people for the best that's in them and inspiring them to be better. I was listening to your story that you just released the other day, the lottery call, and you have the quote at the end that says, "Making a difference for others makes the biggest difference in you." And I was thinking, looking at that story, and if I were to take that quote and then try and craft a story around it, it would not be the story that you told. That one to me has kind of a surprise ending. Can we have you tell the story and then I'll explain why it's a surprise to me that it goes with that quote?
I worked at a lot of advertising agencies, and frequently in a very large advertising agency, there's quite a big cluster of people that come in every variety, every flavor of the rainbow, you know, happy-go-lucky people and intense people and so forth. But when you work in a small agency, which I did briefly, a small agency is a collection of very powerful personalities. In this case, the story was about how I was partnered up with an incredibly talented young guy, very gifted as an artist, but he was a strong cup of coffee and a bit of an acquired taste, is the way that I always used to hear it from my father. Every morning, he kept this list of all the acquaintances of his life. And every Friday, he would call one of them up quite early and give them this BS line. He would say, "Hey, listen, calling because last night I had the most vivid dream that you had won a chunk of money in the lottery. And maybe it's nothing, but it's just that the dream was so clear and so vivid. I thought maybe you might want to go out and buy a ticket." So his theory was, if I can make enough of these calls, one of these people is going to hit the jackpot. And then they'll give me a kind of finder's fee because I set the whole ball rolling, right? And so you're going, oh my God, who thinks of such a thing, right? Well, as it happens, as I say, he was a strong cup of coffee. He had a series of hatreds in the office, people who hated him and people he loathed. And one Friday, instead of making the lottery call, he called up this one guy who was famous for being a nasty driver, just an intense, this guy, when he was behind the wheel, everybody in front of him was an idiot and everybody behind him was an a-hole. And this guy, you know, when he was what you would call an aggressive driver. So this guy on a Friday morning calls him up and says, "Hey, listen, I had the most vivid dream and maybe it's nothing, but I just thought I ought to warn you. Listen, when you're behind the wheel today, do yourself a favor, okay? Slow down. I mean, like I say, it's maybe nothing, but it was just so vivid. You might want to be very careful." Okay. So I said to him, what a weird call to make. And he goes, "Oh, it makes me howl with laughter that he's going to spend the rest of the day driving like an old lady. That just cracks me up." So I thought, oh, okay. Well, as it happens, later that day, that guy was taking his twins to soccer practice and he's about to race to beat a red light. But with that resounding in his memory banks, he steps instead on the brake and narrowly misses getting T-boned by a soda truck that just blew past. It had come off the freeway at a very high rate of speed, and it came on the kid's side of the car. It's in his mind, the way he told the story, it was highly likely those kids would have wound up spending a long time in the hospital. So the next morning, now we didn't know any of this happened. The next morning, that guy appears in the doorway. And if you had seen the face on my partner, it was like, oh God, what? And what have I done? Only to have this guy reach out and embrace him in a genuine 100% hug of gratitude that lasted for like a count of 15. And if you could have seen my partner's face, this cocktail of expressions, like he hadn't heard the story, he didn't know what happened, but he started to sense what must have happened. And instead of being like laughing to himself or being tickled that now he was going to get a payback that was inadvertently good, instead, you could see his conscience starting to ignite and come to life. Like how pleased he was that accidentally he'd helped this guy avoid an accident. And it transformed him. That was why I found the quote. I just happened to run across the quote, but I found the quote so incredibly artful and beautiful that when you reach out to try to do good things for other people, the real person that gets transformed is you. And I really wish I could have seen, that I could have recorded this change of expression on his face, because as the witness to it, you just go, oh, that was profound. That was beautiful.
Well, and then I think you end the story by saying he never made his Friday lottery calls again.
Yeah, he stopped making the lottery calls.
And I find this story so fascinating because when you look at that quote, making a difference for others makes the biggest difference in you. But typically when people are looking to make a difference, they're doing it intentionally, right? Like, I'm going to go make a difference.
Yeah.
And then, they discover, oh, it really benefited me. But this is a story about someone who wasn't looking to make a difference.
Yeah, they were just trying to punk somebody. Yeah.
Yeah. And he just happened upon it. And what was your process in crafting this story? Did you start with the moral? Did you start with the story? Like, what does that look like when you're looking to put something together?
Well, that's a terrific question. Okay, so I'll give you the process of that particular one. As I mentioned to you before we got on this call, I had made quite a few podcast appearances this month. And in it, the theme that I keep banging away at is that my personal sort of life's mission is I'm trying to be an antidote to the bile and negativity of our media, because we're getting a lot of negative stories. It's poison that they're dripping in our ears. It's trying to make us feel like everybody's out to get us, or that you're surrounded by enemies. Well, what happened was, to me, Rochelle, is that as I have tried to be that person who is counter programming, that I'm trying to be that person that's supplying some sense of positivity, it's having that effect on me. I wake up happier, am able to go into almost every situation now looking for the good. And, for example, suppose you just go into a Home Depot and you're just focused on trying to get your light bulbs or your spray paint or whatever. Like, that's your focus. Then you'll have an ordinary experience. But suppose, this is what's been happening to me lately. Suppose you go into Home Depot and instead of just going there to look for your light bulbs and your spray paint and your duct tape, you're also looking for somebody to help. Like, you don't know what form this is going to come in. Like, it could just be somebody that's checking you out or somebody that helped you. And I always carry a pocket full of little plastic figurines now, little things like little dinosaurs, little army men. And I carry a pocket full of these things. Why would I do something so silly and stupid? It's because I was helped at a Lowe's recently by a real gung-ho guy. He was one of these like 55-year-old guys who'd been everywhere and done everything when it comes to plumbing and electrical and carpentry. Like, you could ask him where anything was at the Lowe's. And not only would he tell you where it was, he would say, what are you trying to build? And then he would help you out, right? So I pulled two of these things out and I held them in front of me like you do with a kid. Like, after he'd helped me, I said, okay, pick your prize. So he picks this one and it's a T-Rex. And I go, there you go. You got a good one. Okay, now, why would I do something so silly? Because what it's telling him is, I appreciate you. I'm grateful to you. I want to just be crazy and remind you we're all in this together. I want to be the color in your day. Okay. So when it came to that story, the thing that the reason I had come up with it was I was remembering, oh yeah, that's sort of where this started to form, is the idea that it's so good for you to go out into the universe looking for ways to help other people. You're ultimately going to be the beneficiary. You're going to be the biggest prize winner here. Like that you brought some sunshine and a glow to somebody else's day. I always leave those little toys, by the way. I leave whenever I go to a restaurant, I leave them on top of the check whenever I've left. Or, because they come along and you know the mental process they're going to go through, like, what's this about? What's this for? And what'll happen is restaurants that I've gone back to repeatedly, they'll have them displayed on the little shelves, all the little toys I've left them. And I used to do that. I used to leave cartoons and stuff like that. It's just such a sweet natured thing to do, to let a server know that I didn't just appreciate that. By the way, over tipping is a good way to do that too. But when you're spreading goodness and cheer, it comes back at you. So that quote just struck me as something that, in this case, the quote was last. In most cases, I'll start with the quote and work backwards, trying to remember something that happened to me. Another thing about approaching life from the standpoint of storytelling is that when you go through days and you know the power of stories, you're going to be looking for them. And you'd be surprised how many times they appear to you if you're looking for them.
I know in some of your other things that you've done, you've shared some tips for crafting stories. Can you share some tips with our audience if they're looking to craft a story, if they're going through their life looking for stories? What are your tips for building these stories?
There is a wonderful lesson that the people at Pixar, they have a certain number of rules for how to tell a great story in their movies like Toy Story or A Bug's Life. And they start with this: people admire characters more for trying than for succeeding. And I really like that as a rule. So the way I manifest that rule is, whenever I am telling a story, I am generally in the center of it because these things happen to me. But I never portray myself as the hero, because as it happens, I am never the hero of these tales. What I am is an observer. I'm somebody who watched somebody do something cool or that helped me. And, and so as an observer, what happens to you? So what I'm saying to all of your audience is, if you're going to be crafting a story, do not make yourself the hero of the story. It's off-putting, because instead of standing beside you while you tell the story, right? If you are the witness to the story, then it's easy for them to place themselves in a posture where they're standing next to you. And it makes the moral or the end of the story a lot easier as a shared experience, one where they feel good about you. As I said before, people admire characters more for trying than for succeeding. So if the reason you're telling the story is to share something with someone in such a way that they can feel better about themselves, or it will restore their sense that people aren't out to get them and that we're all in this together, what will happen is that they will sit beside you as you tell it. And I'd much rather that be the case.
I'm just curious about the ethics of storytelling. And you and I discussed this a little bit before, but, we talk about this multi-billion-dollar industry that sells fear and hate and discord, and it is successful. It gets a lot of eyes. It makes a lot of money. And when we break it down into marketing, there's this, I call it the first rule of marketing, that's basically like, let people know that they have a deficiency, like show them their deficiency, show them they have a need, and then our product is the antidote. So it's similar to that fear mongering, right? Because you play to their insecurity, you play to their fears. And that's the story that's so successful in marketing. How do we not get swallowed up in that propaganda side of things? How do we tell stories ethically and help these companies succeed?
Trying to, boy, I read you. It is a problem that the advertising and marketing does tend towards the self-interested. It's a little bit like the guy making the calls on the lottery, right? Hey, I'm going to pretend to be your friend here and suggest some course of action, but ultimately I'm doing it, I'm trying to trick you into thinking well of me in the end. It's a bankrupt ethics. Some of the very best marketing has quite a different approach. It's the apex of the art form. The A.G. Lafley, who was the one-time CEO of Procter & Gamble, had it in his mind that it had to be about that all the marketing and advertising had to add up to something more than clean clothes. And he was behind an effort on behalf of their advertising agencies to do very lyrical and restorative advertising. And I'll give you a great example of it. I so wish I had written this. And what it was during the Sochi Olympics, the Winter Olympics had a commercial that was 60 seconds long, run by Procter & Gamble. It was a multi-brand thing where at the very, very end of the commercial, it featured a sweep of all of the brands that they made for their customers. And I believe his instruction to the creative team was something on the order of, I want you to write a love letter to the people that buy our products. That was his kind of overarching goal. And in response, what they did was the commercial starts on a series of little babies all falling down. They're all trying to walk and they're all falling down. And there's a little Canadian baby and a little Russian baby and a little Japanese baby and a little American baby. And every time one of these falls, the mother is there to go, oops, and then help them back up. And now the little babies are out in the snow or the ice, and they're doing the same thing, all bundled up against the cold, and they're all going plop down, whoops, and the mothers are picking them up. And now the mothers have them on ice skates or skis or on a snowboard, and they're all trying to, move their way around in this incredibly awkward equipment. And again, they're falling and the mothers are there to pick them up. And they show them getting to be children and then young teenagers. And they're all becoming much, much better, but they're all constantly falling down or crashing or getting smashed by some other player. And the mothers are there. And eventually there's this wonderful swell of music, and it's finally the Olympics. And every one of these young athletes, you know who they are. You recognize the mothers. And the skater in the figure skating finally lands the 4 spins, and the hockey player scores the winning goal, and the skier finally, skis our best race ever. And at that point, what do all the athletes do? One after the other. After their triumph, they look for their mothers. And at the very end, it just says, "Thank you, Mom." And it says Procter & Gamble, happy to proud sponsor mothers. And you couldn't help but feel something. You would have to be such a psychopath not to feel something from that commercial, that I looked at it and I thought, the world is better for having seen this. And there was something quite amazingly universal and unifying in the idea that it was Russian mothers and American mothers and Japanese mothers, that we all have the same impulse and we all have the same, heartfelt reaction to seeing it. Well, I wasn't there to see Lafley's reaction, but as I understand, he felt so listened to, so heard in the viewing of that and the crafting of that communication. Now, I ask you, if I tell you that, the soap is on sale, what does that do for anyone? And does it really improve my sense of myself? Am I proud to, because when a mother goes into the store and can buy any product and then sees the one that totally understands her and has affection for her and whose marketing goes out of its way to celebrate and make more out of it, do you think maybe a couple extra nickels is worth it, for having made the commons better? So when you talk about the ethics of marketing, just like fire, you can use it to warm people, or you can use it to burn down their house. Just like the wheel, you can use it to push a pram down the street, or you can use it to be on an armored vehicle to destroy a village. Persuasion is the same way. It just seems to me that we ought to be using it. It's such a powerful thing. Don't underestimate its power to uplift and to enliven and energize and unify. In the end, I feel badly for the people that pour poison into the system. They don't know what they're doing.
I love that your communications and the efforts that you're making lean into these universal values, values that make people's lives better. They make them better people. They make them want to be better people. They make them want to do better things.
I'm trying.
I just find that so inspiring. I'm curious, in your experience in the advertising and marketing world, did you ever run into companies that you had to stand up and say, I think we'd be better served leaning into these better set of values? Like, did you ever have to steer the company in a more ethical direction?
I was a big fan of Toyota as a brand. I just loved that brand. And I've had decades of experience working on it from every angle. I had worked on it from the national brand side of it, doing the big Super Bowl commercials. And I've done it from the dealer association version, where it really is kind of about $199 a month lease, that kind of thing. And I was perpetually trying to persuade the clients that it needed to be about something bigger than the fact that the car was cheap, because the mathematics of value, the perception of value from the standpoint of the buyer, is that if you keep ringing a bell over and over that your product is cheap, then once they've bought it, they know that when they go out into the world and drive it, the perception is going to be, oh, it's cheap, as opposed to, so a minute ago, they liked the idea that it was cheap, and now they want you to shut up because you're telling everybody else it was cheap. So by contrast, Toyota was such a wonderful bulletproof product. It was so well made, and the people that put it together and designed it were so religious about quality that it always seemed to me that the story we needed to be telling was it needed to be a love letter to the people who appreciated quality. That's what the message really needed to be about. So that once you bought it, you would go out into the world and know that every communication coming from Toyota was going to reinforce the idea that that was who you were. You were a person who respected quality, whose values were old-fashioned devotion and dedication to doing difficult things the hard way, but the good way. So we were perpetually at war over that, that you didn't need to say things that made products appear inexpensive. What you needed to do was inflate people's impression about what it was worth so that when they confront the price, they feel like it's worth it.
So tell me, I think this plays into like some of the research that goes behind preparing these campaigns, preparing these stories. And I want to share an experience with you, and then we'll get more into the specific question. But I had a really interesting experience this last year. I worked for local government, and one of the campaigns I was working on was fentanyl awareness campaign. And as you may know, fentanyl is a really big problem for our country right now. And for people who are buying drugs, not through a pharmacy, any kind of drug off the street, it could have fentanyl in it, and likely in lethal doses. And people don't know that. And so we were just trying to get that awareness out into our community. So knowing that our target audience was teenagers and young adults, I partnered with our school district, our local health department, the DA's office, and just put together this campaign. It included social media. It included a testimonial video from mothers who had been affected by fentanyl. It included youth-led town hall, and some things like that. By and all, campaign was reasonably successful. And throughout this process, I remember talking to my kids who are in the same audience, target audience age group. And I just said, hey, and they're teenagers, so they don't really like to talk to me right now. But I just said, hey, you know about fentanyl, right? You guys are aware about fentanyl. And they're like, oh yeah, we know, we're good. And I was like, okay. And I'm sitting here thinking, do they know about Narcan? Do they know that if they're getting something from a friend, it could be dangerous? There's all these details that I want them to know, but they don't want to talk with me about it. And then I watched this movie series, and I think it's on HBO. It's Euphoria. Have you seen Euphoria?
I have not. I'm aware of it, though.
Okay, so Euphoria is a series about a group of teenagers who are coming of age, but they're really struggling with drug addiction and abuse and, these really terrible topics. It's a rough series, and it doesn't portray drug addiction nicely. It shows the really gritty, brutal reality of drug addiction. But it's this show that both my kids watched. I'm sure the majority of their friends watched it. And in the middle of that series, it gives all of that information about fentanyl. It talks about Narcan. It talks about how to help someone if you think they've overdosed. It talks about staying with someone, not leaving them alone, administering Narcan. Like, it goes through all these talking points that I've been working so hard to get out into my community, and in such an effective way. And I was like, Hollywood, good job, because you are sharing that message in a way that reaches this target audience in a way that we can't. As local government, we can't reach them, not that effectively. And so it makes me think, as you're telling your stories and you're working with these companies, there's all this research that goes on in the background as far as like your target audience. I'm looking at Toyota, that story that you just shared about Toyota, really looking at like what is the value of this product, right? Because you had to push back to the company to say, yeah, it's a really good price. And that's an important piece for this story. But there's also this other piece that we need to be sharing. So when you're working for corporate, because a lot of the stories that you craft are in the corporate world. So working for companies, working for CEOs, and they come to you and they say, we need to get this message across. And usually it's this basic message of, you want to buy our car, it's cheap, buy our car, right? And then you have to do all this background research, this like, who's our target audience? What are the values we can lean into? Like, what is that background piece? What are you really looking at to craft this story that really, leans into the product, leans into the message and tells the message, but not, you're not just sitting on the corner saying, buy our car, because that's not effective.
The very first thing, of course, is that you may notice a phenomenon that it's occurring more and more in companies. And that is that there's a kind of a consumer advocate. That is that somebody in the company is appointed. Sometimes they'll call it consumer success or customer success people. Like their job is to make sure that the customer thrives and succeeds in the use of the product. Sometimes it's attached to a piece of software that requires a certain education level on how to use it before it can really be exploited. So a customer success agent would be the one who makes sure that they onboard the client correctly so that they can maximize their functionality. Well, in really big brands, there will frequently be somebody who in the marketing department, their job is to be an advocate for the customer so that the messaging and the orientation of the people that sell it are always focused on making sure that this has a good outcome, not just for us, but for our customers first. That it's so, when you can make a brand communicate to somebody that they really love their customers, what will happen in return is, because of the rule of reciprocity, they'll sort of have an affection for you in return. And when love is involved, money is no object.
I mean, that's such a powerful concept, helping your customer feel that you genuinely care for the customer.
Yeah. Imagine how powerful that is when you genuineness, I think, is the word. You've chosen that word aptly because it can't be fake. You see it again and again in people that really do care for their customers. It's often in a small business that you'll find that they really do appreciate it. I bought a camera once from a company called Photo Jojo. Photo Jojo isn't around anymore because they got acquired by a much larger company. But when you would buy something from them, the box would arrive like an Amazon box. And in it, I noticed that the manifest, the little shipping thing, had all the items on it. But then at the bottom, it had an item that said ROWR exclamation point $0. And ROWR, Rower? What does that mean? And then you find a little plastic dinosaur in the box. And that, by the way, is where I get that, picking up the little toys. Because what they were saying was, we are a rambunctious, playful group over here. And we have gone the extra mile just to sort of spread that fun to you. That little gesture is a kind of hug, if you will, and it's infectious. And have you seen that story that I've told called Year of the Dog? And it's in defense of dogs. And I don't know if that rings a bell. I'll be happy to tell it now if we have the time. It doesn't take long.
Go ahead and tell it.
All right. So I was in a restaurant, and this was very close to the new year. And I was sort of sitting there open to the universe because I was thinking about, what do I want to accomplish in the new year? And I overheard this woman talking about her ex-husband. And the terms that she used to describe him were, he was a dog and that all men are dogs. And I remember thinking, I don't know if dogs can sue, but if I were a dog, I would sue for defamation, because dogs are awesome. And it's not that dogs don't have their problems. I mean, if you think about dogs, you've got to walk them and you have to pick up their poop and you've got to feed them constantly. And when they're young, they chew on everything and they pee everywhere and they shed on everything. And they cost a fortune at the vet, and God help you if they bite someone. And if you go on a trip and you can't take them with you, you have to pay to board them or hire some sketchy kid to come into your house and take care of them. I mean, objectively, that's a lot of downside. So my question is, why do people bother? Why do they love dogs so much? And it's because dogs love you first. They don't judge you. They never look at you and wonder if they could have done better. And, when you are ever in danger, they just don't think about the danger. They just hurl themselves at it because dogs think you are worth saving. They love you without any rationale. And so my response at the end of this was to say, so lady, all men are not dogs, although I am trying harder to be. Now, if you think about that in terms of branding or message, there's something incredibly instructive there, which is you got to be the one to make the first move. You can't go through life demanding respect or waiting for people to love you. You have to be lovable, and brands especially have to be lovable. Toyota, to go back to them as an example, in their San Antonio plant where they make Toyota trucks like the Tundra and the Tacoma, I spent a lot of time down there, and just offhanded, the guy that ran the plant mentioned to me that the water that comes in isn't as clean as the water that goes out of the factory. They're very conscious of the San Antonio water table, and they want to be a good citizen of that town. They want people to know that when Toyota is here, that we're going to leave the place better than we found it. And that is a wonderfully lovable approach to take. That's their attitude towards everything. Our intention is to leave things better than we found them.
So what do you do when you have a company that isn't leaning into that kind of value system? Like, how do you market for them when you don't because it has to be genuine. It has to be authentic, which to me sounds like it has to come from the top down. And so when you're working with a company that maybe doesn't have that throughout it, you can't promise things to the customers. It's not really part of the brand. So what do you do?
Well, your life is your life, and we're here for a limited amount of time. And so I would ask, why are you working for somebody like that? You have a choice. And I have, on occasion, worked for people where I looked at them funny, and then I remember thinking, this has got to end. I can't stand these people. And you know what? Nobody's holding a gun to your head. Now, let's take it from a different vantage point. If the top person really is a kind of a douche canoe, then this is never going to end well for you. Because if you spend enough time soaking in this kind of behavior, you will become that person. That is a rule of the universe. You are the result of the people you spend the most time. That's why it's so vital that you spend your time with positive people who want good things for others, because you don't want to be around people that are going to turn you into a hateful, self-aggrandizing, self-interested profiteer who, just want to drive the world like a used car and then, roll it in at the end of your life with the world better off, or worse, much worse off that you were here. So if you want to transform a company like that, you can do so, but it's going to be a slow process. It's a war of attrition. I must say that bad people tend to draw bad people to them.
So really being selective about the companies that you work for.
Yeah, I wish I had known that. I wish I had known that when I was younger, is you have a choice. And let's look at it this way. Pretend that brands are people. When there's this marvelous expression, or it's a sentiment that is shared by both Marcus Aurelius and Dale Carnegie. And anytime the two of them agree on something, it's like, chances are it's a good idea or a good thought. And here's what they agree on in not so many words. Life gets so much easier when people like you. And if you want to go through life as somebody that people like, you cannot spend time with people who people hate, or, that they're going to have their effect on you. You're going to soak in it and it's going to get absorbed. And to that end, if you think of brands like people, that you look at a certain brand. If I said to you, try to see if you can put an actor or actress's name on Nike, who would it be? Who do you imagine Nike is as a person? I'll bet you could come up with a list of about 6 or 7. And then if I said, would you want to spend a lot of time with that person? Chances are you'd say, yeah, I could see that being a good thing. I was speaking to somebody who was this very admirable woman, just the kind of woman you want your daughter to grow up to be. She was self-possessed and intelligent, but at the same time, gentle and accommodating, and just exactly what you want your daughter to grow up to be. Or in my case. Okay, so this is what she said. She said that she was in charge at Nike of women's apparel and certain brands. And this was at a time when Nike was very male dominated. And she started talking about how there was a distinction between fitness and training. And she didn't find it satisfying that women were into fitness. She wanted them to be training for something. And I thought, what a cool distinction, right? Because training is, the orientation is, it's goal-oriented. And if you're in training with somebody else, you're not just trying to get fit. You're trying to, there's teamwork, and we're on the same team, and we're supporting each other, and we're going to achieve something. It's like training for a half marathon with somebody. You feel linked to them. Okay. As she was describing this, I thought, oh, wow, that's a great brand. A brand that is that anybody that buys the product, they're trying to help that person absorb a kind of ambitious sort of, hey, let's reach for something. That's the kind of brand that you could really love. And as opposed to just some brand that's trying to sell you a pair of shoes. Like, that's no good. Just like you have a choice of who you hang out with and who you work for and on behalf of, you certainly have a choice of what brands you buy, that you patronize. And so I'm flummoxed by brands that do not want to go into the world and make people like that don't behave like a human being that wants to be a good citizen and wants to be beloved. Now, imagine this. Seth Godin is quite fond of saying, about brands, you have to ask yourself as a brand, if you were to cease to exist tomorrow, would anybody miss us? And I can tell you quite fervently that if Nike were to disappear, they'd recreate it. They'd rebuild, people would rebuild it from the ground up. They would, you know what I mean? If Procter & Gamble were to disappear, people would miss it. They would miss Tide, and they would miss Bounty and so forth. And it's particularly true of, you remember when, you were probably too young, but they tried to reformulate Coca-Cola and they called it New Coke. And there was an uproar. There was a gigantic, and that was when Coca-Cola went, wow, I guess we don't actually own this brand. It's the buyers that own it. Okay. In other words, what they were saying was, what was being communicated is, well, we love that brand. We would miss that brand. And brands that don't go out into the world and make people by their presence feel good about themselves, they're not doing anybody any favors. And if they're a public company, they are vastly undervalued. Or they're stunting the value of their brand. One last comment about that, which is, if you as a person occasionally wonder, what would they say at my funeral about me? And you don't know quite confidently that it would be nice things to say, so if you're working on a bad brand and you're helping a bad brand and you're just trying to manipulate people on behalf of this bad actor, you're just trying to bamboozle people into buying the product, where's that going to register in your eulogy?
Absolutely. Well, Neal, I could talk to you forever, but let's move into our Just Say It questions. We have a couple of questions we like to ask at the end of every interview. So our first one is, if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self when you were just getting started in your career, what would it be?
That you don't have to solve every problem on your own. And that, in fact, what you should have your radar up for. You should be on the lookout for people whose talents you respect and whose company you enjoy, so that you can do things together. What I mean is ventures. In this country, the number one guarantee of success is initiative. That is, you are unafraid to try. And it is a lot easier to try something and keep a sense of momentum if you have a partner or you have a cluster of people who are trying to achieve the same thing. You remember I was saying before about the distinction at Nike between fitness and training? That to me is like, when you're in training, you can do it with other people. And by doing it with other people, the likelihood of success is vastly greater. And I wish when I had been much younger, I'd recognized, be on the lookout for somebody who you respect and admire, and try to grab hold of them as a partner in some venture. And you will learn more in the trying than you will in the succeed. And that, I think, I wish I'd known that. When I was young, I was just trying to do what people told me to do. I wasn't trying to venture and do things on my own. I was too busy trying to rise in an organization. I think that was to this day, it's a vast regret that I didn't lean on my own skills earlier.
So do you, throughout your career, or as you've matured in your career, do you have ventures that you do on the side, outside of your career?
I do now, much more than I used to. Like, for example, this whole TikTok video thing, it wasn't even a side hustle. It was just a thing. I was sort of startled at how many people felt the way I felt. And so I wish I had gotten out into the world sooner. And back when blogs were first starting, or when YouTube was not even a real nobody kind of understood its power. You know what's astonishing is when you think about, like, now a network show that has 1 million fans is considered a pretty big hit, but a YouTube channel with a couple of million followers is nothing. It's all over the place. You go, oh my God. Do you know that among Gen Z, they would be perfectly willing to give up every bit of cable TV if they just got to keep TikTok? So that tells me that, gee, I wish I'd gotten to this even sooner. I am happy, though, that what's being reflected back to me is a sense that human beings they're actually better even than I thought they were. They're still subject to their insecurities and their failures and their nastiness. I mean, we all know that, but they're also capable of astonishing generosity and acts of selflessness and togetherness. And it's our natural state of affairs. You are not meant to go through life alone, so you shouldn't even try.
I love that. And I love that you're building this community, because not only are you doing a venture, right, which is important for you, fulfilling for you, but you're building this community that brings people together in this, this beautiful perspective that you have about humanity. Question number 2, what is one habit that you do daily that you would recommend to our listeners?
Going to work out. I'm usually at the gym about 5:30. And what it means is that I'm at my desk by 7:30. And I am the day is rip roaring at 7:30 a.m. And the feeling of optimism and positivity it gives me to watch the sun very early in the sky and already have worked out. So I feel physically good. It fills me with a kind of positivity, like all things are possible today. It's an early part of the day. The sun is up and I'm up before other people. And I highly recommend that.
Neal Foard, thank you so much. Neal Foard provides consulting services to help leaders and companies tell their stories and articulate their agendas in compelling ways. And he shares his stories on multiple social media channels. Neal, where can our listeners find you?
Because I have an unusually spelled name, I'm very easy to search out. So it's Neal, Neal, Foard, Ford like board or Foard. Anyway, so because of that, you can just Google me, Neal Foard, and you'll find me. And I'm at nealfoard@gmail.com. Then also passionatelogic.com is my persuasion consultancy, where I try to teach leaders how to be more persuasive.
Thank you so much. When you swing through town or when I make it down south, I am going to take you up on that cup of coffee.
I certainly hope so, Rochelle. It's been a real pleasure. And I think you got a great thing going here.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.
Cheers.
We have additional resources and links in our show notes at justsayitcommunications.com. Transcripts are up on the website and the video is up on YouTube. My team is Andrea Casas-Tapete, Zara Momini, and Shinga Yoshimine. And my name is Rochelle Bedell. If you enjoyed this show, please like and share it. And don't forget to apply what you learn on the show. We hope you'll join us again soon for another conversation.